Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat live lectures. Dear friends, today in political geography we will be talking about frontiers and boundaries, concepts and classification. In this particular lecture, we will attempt to understand the differentiation between frontiers and boundaries and the confrontation that lies within. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Dr. Intikhab Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed is associated with Delhi University in capacity of a teacher for past 4 years. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Amrit. Very good afternoon, dear students. In today's lecture, we are discussing the frontiers and boundaries, their basic concepts, and the classification. So, in the first topic or the first part, we will discussing the frontiers and boundaries, the basic concepts, and the classification of the frontiers. So, first of all, we should know what are the important aspects which are being covered in this lecture, because the frontiers and boundaries, they are very much important since the human civilizations. In present time, the zone or the frontiers, they are diminishing, they are changing and taking the new shape in terms of boundaries. So, the frontiers and boundaries, they are very much important and are very much interesting subject for the political geographers. And in fact, the most important aspect or most important thing is the frontiers, which has been very much interested by political geographers. In fact, the boundaries study is also very important because the boundaries are always in news, because they are very much the source of frictions between different countries or between different states. So these two terms, the frontiers and boundaries, they are not similar, but they are different into their concept. The meaning of these two concepts is very much different. So first of all, we should understand what is the difference between frontiers, boundaries, and the borders. Because these three important terminologies, they are sometimes used as interchangeably, but there is a difference between their meanings. As we can see, a frontiers is a line or is expressed in terms of a zone which is having width as well as the length. In fact, in English, the term frontier, it is used to describe the zone of an area on either side of a boundary line, and the boundary is simply a line that separates different states. It may be a physical limit of a state, geographical, territorial, or national jurisdiction, but a border may be a line or a zone. So first of all, we should know what is exactly a frontier. A frontier simply means that which is in between or in front. It has been derived from a Latin word which means France, or from a French front, that means forehead. It may be a forehead of a state in political geography. So basically, it is an area which is a part of a whole and that lay ahead of hinterland. It may be called foreland, borderland, or march. The frontier is neither a legal nor a political intellectual concept. It is essentially a natural and social concept as economy or the region which is habitable or spearhead of the civilizations. The frontiers mean different things in political geography, as the frontiers is a zone which is having width as well as the length. So it is a zone which is no states having the exercise or the full control over that zone. So originally it is an area that laying beyond or that is adjacent to a territory, that in that the boundary may be expanded. This is also one of the reasons where generally the less settled territory is found and there is a scarce population. So the space between different zones where generally there is like no man's land or which is inhospitable, where generally the inhospitable conditions are found, and that separate between two settlements is called a frontier. Sometimes it is synonymous with a border. So we should know, after seeing this frontier definition or simple the concept of a frontier, we should know what are different kind of or different classifications of a frontier. As we can see in the past, generally the frontiers used to be classified into four major categories. The first one is natural or physical frontiers, and the second one is anthropo-geographic or ethnic frontiers. The third one is geometrical or astronomical. Then the fourth one is political frontiers. This was the definition or the classification that were prevalent in the past. Because of the development in the frontier zones in present time, the various scholars, various political geographers, they have classified the frontiers into different categories that we can analyze into detail. And this classifications covers all aspects of a frontiers. The first type is of a frontier is that is in relation to sovereign or the sovereignty of a state, that is having two major groups. One is political frontiers, the other is settlement frontiers. The settlement frontiers further has been classified into primary, secondary, and hollow frontiers. And the second classification is in relation to the indigenous population that lives in that frontier zone. That is of two types: frontiers of inclusion and frontiers of exclusion. The third category is, these all we will discuss one by one into detail. The third aspect is in relation to the pace of frontier advance, the advancement of a frontier. This is also classified into two categories: dynamic and static frontiers. The fourth one is in relation to the degree of trans-frontier contact, which is also categorized into two further categories: contact and separation frontiers. So then we will take one by one of these all. In fact, the first category of a frontiers, which is based upon the sovereignty of a state, this having two major groups. One is political frontier and the other one is settlement frontiers. So first of all, we should know what is a political frontiers. In fact, the political frontiers sometimes is confused or misunderstood with international boundaries, because generally the boundary is made or is executed between a frontier zone. So the frontiers, it is generally de facto limit or the contentions between two states, when two states they try to gain the access in that particular zone, is called a de facto limit. And on the other hand, there is de jure, which is settled by a law or by treaty or by agreement. So generally the frontiers in between, if there comes a boundary, the boundary in between tries to take the advantage of the both sides of that frontier zone. The political frontiers also sees how much the state is a sovereign, or it knows that how much the sovereignty is the state, a particular state is having. In fact, the frontiers, they are under pressures from both sides, which both sides means those sides in which the frontiers is in contact within it. So we can see the examples of the political frontiers, like the expansion of the Russian state into Kazakhstan and the Soviet Central Asia. That was very much associated with the political frontiers. In fact, we can see the example of the southern part of the Saudi Arabia region, where this political frontiers, they are prevalent, they are found. The second type is settlement frontiers. In fact, the settlement frontiers, they are having like expansion within the legal boundary, and they are the best explanation when the colonization of interior of Australia, like in settlement frontiers, we can see that there is a particular population, there is some population in that particular region. Like we can see the example of Australia, where the Aborigines, they are in that particular central belt, but because of the colonization of that region, the like Aborigines, they has been thrown out of that particular region, and the colonists, they try to gain the access of the resources. That is an example of a settlement frontiers. This is classified into primary settlement frontiers. It is when like different states that try to gain the access of a particular territory for the first time, but after some time that leaves that legal limits has been reached out. Like we can see the example of the American or the USA, which has gained the access into the western side of the territory till the like limit has been reached, that is called primary settlement frontiers. The second one is secondary settlement frontiers, is that when there is a adverse condition in a particular region and the primary settlement try to gain the access into that and try to gain the access of that particular resources and hinder the settlement in that particular region. So this is a secondary settlement frontiers. The third one is hollow settlement frontiers. Hollow settlement frontiers is then when a particular state or a particular settlement consolidate and tries to gain the unnecessary exploitation of the resources, like exhaustion of different kind of resources and mineral in that particular territory, in that particular region. In present time, we can see that the political frontiers, they are very less or very rare in numbers. Like we can see the example of the USA and Canada, which is having de facto limit of the sovereign territory. On the other hand, the settlement frontiers, they are prevalent. They are found into two different zones, two different regions of the world in present time. One is the South Arabian region and the other is the Antarctica region. The second classification is in relation to the indigenous population of the frontiers zone. These are classified into the population which is indigenous, which is particularly living in that particular region. So this is classified into two categories. One is frontiers of inclusion, where generally the frontier are passing that include or the assimilates the indigenous population at that particular region. This we can see in Arab region, in Spanish region. The second one is frontiers of exclusion, when the frontiers like exclude the indigenous population and the segregate the indigenous population of that particular region. Like we can see the example of Red Indians, which are in Northern America, that has been segregated. This is the best examples of the frontiers of exclusion. The third classification is in relation to the pace of frontier advance, how the frontiers being advanced, how they are changing, how they are moving. So the first one is the dynamic frontiers. Dynamic frontiers, they are always in motion, and that involves the continuous colonization of different new territories. And the other one is the static frontiers. Static frontiers means when the dynamic process of a particular frontier stops because of the resistance, either because of the environmental factors or resistance from the indigenous population or the absence of the colonizers, that led to the static frontiers that we can see from in the Appalachian regions in the North America and the Great Dividing Range in Australia, where the aborigines, they try to take the advantage of the static frontiers. The fourth classification is in relation to the degree of trans-frontier contact. These are of two types. One is contact frontiers, and the second one is separation frontiers. In this contact frontiers, there is a like peaceful communication and intercourse between two states. But in the separation frontiers, there is a zone of dissected terrain that because of the scarce population that minimize the risk of a particular and that separates the enemies from that particular region. They are separation frontiers. So after seeing these all, we can see that the frontiers, they are generally found as by this map. We can see that the frontiers generally are found either in Arabian region or the southern part of Saudi Arabia or Arabian Peninsula, which like Saudi Arabia is separated from Qatar, Oman, UAE and Yemen by different frontiers, and at some extent Antarctica is having these frontiers in present times. So in the last we can see that the frontiers, this is a broader zone. It is just not a geographical line, it is a zone which is having length and width, which is and where generally the people live in that zone. It is aerial, and on the other hand, the frontiers and the boundaries, they are respectively the zones and the lines. The frontier is a zone and the boundary is a line which separate different political activity that has been given by Prescott. So after seeing the frontiers, we can see that what are different boundaries, what is the basic concept of the boundaries. In fact, in political geography or in geography, the boundary is an imaginary line that separates different nations, different identities of, or the right of a one nation that separates the right of the one nation from the right of the others. In fact, the boundary is an invisible line that appears on the map or that has been established by either by laws, treaties, accord, or by different practices. So it fixes the limit or the sovereign limit of a particular state. And in fact, the boundary is not just a vertical plane. It is a vertical. It is not just a plane. It is a vertical plane that cut across the different kind of air space, and that cut across the soil and subsoil of the adjacent or the adjoining state. It is sometimes synonymous with the border. It means boundary and border, sometimes they are used interchangeably. So let's see what are the basic characteristics of the boundaries. In fact, the basic characteristics of the boundaries, they include different aspects by which we can identify that these are the boundaries. Like we can see in a sparsely populated regions, desert, these boundaries which led to the least frictions that we can see in the case of Spain and Portugal. And in fact, in the modern states, the state try to gain the access by either, or the people are bound and the economy is bound by different, either by laws, by physical features, different ideas on belief, and the activities within that state. So the boundaries may be expanded into the frontiers in the coming futures. So the natural limit may be reached up to that mark in that boundary. It is also an outer line of the effective control of the central government that generally tries to gain the access of the resources and keep the enemy out. So it is the legal political phenomena which is not created by but fixed. It is like the boundary is a fixed process, had been fixed by human agencies, by political government, by different organization. So the different boundaries, they are having different goals, different ideologies. There may be different structure and interface between different states. So first of all, we should know what is the basic distinction or the difference between frontiers and boundaries. So by highlighting these simple points, that frontiers is outer oriented, because different territories, they are found into far-flung areas, and the boundaries, they are inner oriented. Frontiers are centrifugal force, where the population generally tries to go out from that particular region. But boundaries, they are centripetal force. They try to cover up, bind up the population in that particular region. And the frontiers are zone, they are aerial. And the lines are, the boundaries are, they are linear in nature. The frontiers, they are integrating factor. They try to integrate, because these are the natural factors. But boundaries are the separating factors. They try to separate two different identities. In fact, the frontiers, they are transitional, or they are geographical, they are natural, but boundaries are man-made, they are artificial, they are politically made. The frontiers were made or were prevalent in the past, but in present time, frontiers are less in number. They are found in particular only on counted places, but boundaries are found in present times. Frontiers, they were the historical, they were there, but in present time, they has been changed by different political laws. And the frontiers, they are not movable. They cannot be moved. They are natural, like any mountain, any river, they cannot be moved. But the different boundaries, they are movable. So how these boundaries have been evolved? These are different stages in a boundary and frontiers phenomena. In fact, boundaries, they are drawn on an advanced stage of a frontier formation, because they are artificial in nature. But on the other hand, the frontiers, they are natural. So the boundaries concept has been evolved by different aspect or different limits of a state that needed to be specified. By analyzing this, we can say that the boundaries on a global level, they has been evolved by three basic processes, either by arbitrary process, or by evolutionary process, or by arbitration process. Arbitrary is basically when there is an agreement between two parties. Evolutionary means when it has been evolved slowly, and arbitration when there is any law and any treaty in between stage. So after seeing the definition, the concept of the boundaries and frontiers, now let's see what are the different stages of boundaries development. The stages, there are some important or four basic important stages of the boundaries development. First one is allocation of the boundaries. First we allocate the boundary where it should be, or where there, because this is the general political decision where the particular development of a particular boundary should be there. Second one is delimitation of the boundary. Delimitation is particularly selection of a particular zone, particular region where the boundary should be delimited. And the fourth one is demarcation. Demarcation means when we demarcate or when we mark the particular line or the zone, and we set up certain kind of identification marks. It may be posts, fences, walls, and different kind of other physical marks that shows this is the demarcated boundary. And the last one is administration or the management of a boundary, when we maintain and try to characterize those boundaries by different kind of operations in those phenomena. So these were all the important aspect of the boundaries. In the second part, we will discuss the classification of the boundaries. For this, thank you very much. Thank you. Very good afternoon. In the first section, we were discussing various aspects of a frontiers and boundaries, their classification of the frontiers, their evaluation, and different stages for the formation of the boundaries. But in the second half, we will be discussing different classification or the type of the boundaries, because different scholars, they have classified the boundaries into different categories based upon different criteria, different methods they have applied for the classification or the types of the different kind of boundaries. But simply we can, it can be classified that the boundaries, first of all, we can see based upon the morphology. On the basis of morphology or the characteristics or the type of rock or the systems which are found in that particular region, they are classified into physical, geometric, anthropological, and complex boundaries, which we will discuss one by one into detail. The second classification is genetic boundaries, which is based upon the origin of the boundaries, which has been given by Richard Harshon in 1936. That has been divided into different categories. The first genetic boundary is antecedent boundary, then subsequent or consequent boundary, then superimposed, and last one is relic or the relict boundaries. On the basis of location, the boundaries are also classified, which is continental and maritime boundaries. So let's discuss one by one into detail. Based upon the morphology, the first aspect of the morphology is the physical boundaries. In physical boundaries, generally we include different physical aspects, because physical aspects are very important in the boundary formations. Like we can see one by one the mountain ranges, rivers, lakes, and these all coastline, ridges line, desert, forest, and swamps, they all forms the physical boundaries between different nations. So let's see these all one by one into detail. In fact, the mountain boundary, which is very much physical in nature, it is very much effective because this mountain region is very much permanent in nature. The boundaries cannot be changed with usually, because it is having especially inhabited region. So the boundary or the mountain region is the most important aspect of the physical boundary. In fact, the mountain, they do not always provide the amicable separation of different neighbors, or different neighbors, they are living in that particular zone. They are not always like divided or amicably settled into different categories. We can see the example of mountain boundaries which are prevalent into different regions of the world, like the Argentina and the Chile boundary. They are separated by a crest of the Andes mountains, but there is a contention between these two countries that where this crest line should be there, because Chile give the advantage of the western side and the eastern side is Argentina. So there is a contention where this crest line should be there, and there is a disagreement between these two. In fact, between India and China, there is a boundary. From the ancient time, the Himalayas always have given the advantage or given the boundary, physical boundary, and given the advantage to India. So the Himalayan region is also one of the important physical mountain boundary region. In fact, the second aspect is water boundaries. In water boundaries, different aspects are covered, like rivers, the lakes, and the ocean. They are the most important mediums or physical features that are used as a boundary. In African regions, like we can see in Eastern African regions, the water made the boundaries between different states, like the Lake Victoria that makes the boundary between Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. But the question is where this boundary line should be there. because there is division of the river, or where the boundary or the median line should be there. Either should be left side of the river, it should be right side of the river, or there should be a Thalweg principle, which is the median line in the deepest part of the river, or it should be somewhere else. So there is always dispute because the river changes its course over the period of time. In fact, the river boundaries, they are like in between India and Pakistan, like Satluj River, that is a boundary line between India and Pakistan, and the Zambezi River, which is the boundary line between Zambia and Zimbabwe. Sometimes the lake also makes the boundary between different states, like the Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. They make the boundaries between USA and Canada. Sometimes the marshes also make the boundaries between different states, as we can see the example of like Belgium and Netherlands, where there is a boundary which is made by marshes. In fact, in Indian territory, in the Gujarat region or the Kutch region, there is a boundary between India and Pakistan, which is made by the marshland. And physical coastal boundaries. In fact, the coastal water that has been important and devised in 1983 by a United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, that has been classified, that has been devised the limit or the basic sovereign limit of a state as 12 nautical miles, and the exclusive fishing zones and the exclusive economic zone to 200 nautical miles. And in fact, after seeing this all, we can say that the water boundaries, they are sometimes are very difficult because the water generally changes its direction or changes its course, as we can see this in the Rio Grande River along the US and Mexico border. The river generally changes its course. In flood season, it goes either side, either in the USA or sometimes into Mexico border. So there is a dispute between different countries. The river, because it changes its direction. The ocean also, the ocean boundaries are also sometimes very much problematic, because most states generally they claim that limit of the water starting from its out at the sea, not from the coastline. And because different states they try to take the advantage of those resources which are found in the coastal waters. So, and the next important physical boundary is desert boundary. Desert boundary are generally found in those regions, either in the Central Asian regions, as we can see the example of the Mongolian desert, which is generally between or the divide between Russia and China. And the mountains, like the mountains, the desert are also very important and very hard to cross, and they are also sparsely populated. In fact, in Sahara region, we can see like northern region, the Libya, the Algeria and Egypt, they has been like they are in the northern side of the Sahara region, and they has been divided by a boundary of the Sahara desert from the Mauritania, Mali and Niger regions. So after this, the second type is geometric boundaries. Geometric boundaries are generally the straight lines boundaries that has been devised based upon the latitude or the longitude or the arc of a circle that has been drawn from a particular point. So the geometric boundaries, they are generally either they are artificial, and generally they are devised based upon the different negotiations, different treaties and agreement, or by different arbitration or arbitrary process. So the geometric boundaries, they are very necessary or very common, which devised based upon the latitude and longitude, because they are very much abstract concept, and they cannot be changed by different process, either geographic or geomorphic process or by human actions. Because if in a particular region, if there is any like earthquake or volcanic eruptions, so these geometric lines based upon latitude and longitude, they cannot be changed, because these are the fixed lines. The other, we can see the example of these geometric lines as in Aozou strip, which is the contention between Libya and Chad, which is a 1,000 kilometer long line or long boundary that has been drawn by Britishers in 1899. So in present time, there is a contention between Libya and Chad, because this is a straight line. So different countries, Libya and Chad, they try to make the access into that particular line, particular boundary. We can see the example of North American region, where like these geometric boundaries, the best example we can take from the like US boundary between US and Canada, which is around 2100 kilometer, and which is divided between 49-degree latitude, which is starting from Minnesota to Washington, and that has been established in 1846 by United States and the Britain, because the Canada was under Britain rule at that time, and the other part, some part of this US and Canada, which is along the Alaska border, which is 1100 kilometer long line, that is between that there are 2 points between this boundary. One is the Alaska and the Yukon Territory region, which is divides between 40-degree west longitude lines. In fact, in some other portions of the world, we can see these geometrical lines has been drawn, like the 38 parallels between North and South Korea has been devised, has been drawn, and the 17th parallel line, which has been devised between North and South Vietnam. So after seeing this second type, the third one is anthropogenic boundaries. The anthropogenic boundaries are those boundaries which is based upon either different languages, different religions, or different cultures. Like we can see the example of Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. They has been devised based upon different languages, and in fact the Indo-Pakistan boundary and Indo-Bangladesh boundary, they are also anthropogenic in character. And by these anthropogenic boundaries, they confirm different borders between different ethnic groups, between different cultural groups. In present time, we can see that the division of the anthropogenic boundaries is generally between different civil divisions, not within or not to a particular state. So it is very difficult to define the anthropogenic boundaries, because they change over the period of time, and so they are very much problematical, because there is a lack of trust between two different parties, two different states. And in fact, the nation state is found in those regions, or the feeling of that nation state is generally found where there is the ethnicity prevalent in that particular zone, particular state or particular region. By this, we can see that the anthropogenic boundaries, which were devised between Greek and Turkish region in the Cyprus in 1974. So the anthropogenic boundaries, they also devise or demarcate two different regions of a country. The anthropogenic cultural boundaries, they are also between some states that coincide with differences in ethnicity, like in Germany and Netherlands regions. The other cultural boundaries are drawn on the basis of different geometrical patterns, and they simply are, they may be simply a straight lines or that are devised on a map. The anthropogenic boundaries are also the boundaries which are devised based upon the different religions in different countries. Like in few countries, we can see that different states, they had been divided based upon the religion. The best example we can see, or it has been seen, that the British, they have split the India into the two different identities. Like generally the Hindus are found in India and the Muslim in Pakistan. So it is the best example of a anthropogenic religious boundaries. In fact, in island regions, there is a dispute based upon different religious aspect. Anthropogenic language boundaries. Language is also very important factors that draws the boundaries between different regions. In fact, we can see the example of Europe, where the language has given very much or the immense importance for the division of different territories, division of different states. In the 19th century, like Italy and Germany, they has been divided on the based upon the language criteria. In fact, after World War II in 1919, different regions of the world or the different regions of the European, they has been devised, they has been carved out based upon the Versailles Peace Conference and the different boundaries that has been redevised, that has been redrawn, like in Bulgaria, in Hungary, and in Poland. And in the 20th century, we can see that the language is also very important factors that has been devised different identities, different nationalities based upon different languages. And the fourth type is complex boundaries. The complex boundaries are those boundaries which is not devised only on a particular base, particular type, and that is having more than one type. The example we can see, like in USA and Canada, the two different countries, the different kind of boundaries has been devised, like the Great Lake and the St. Lawrence River that makes the boundary in the eastern side and the 49-degree parallels in the western side of this between two countries. The next classification is genetic boundaries, that is based upon the origin, how the different boundaries has been originated. So Richard Hartshorne, he has given this classification in 1938 and has been devised and has been classified 4 different aspects of genetic boundaries. The first one is antecedent boundaries. By its definition or by its meaning, antecedent means the boundary which has been come out before the settlements came, or that has been evolved when there was already a type of human landscape. We can take the example like the boundary between Malaysia and Indonesia and the boundary between the Alaska and Canada region, that first the boundary came and the settlement, after that the settlement has been settled there. The second type is subsequent or the consequent boundaries. The subsequent and the consequent boundaries, they are installed or delimited and demarcated by different cultural landscape when the cultural landscape has already set up there. Because if there is a particular settlement in a particular region and then the boundary is settled or installed, that is called subsequent boundaries. It is a long process because these boundaries take a long time to make or to formulate in that regions. So on this basis, the consequent boundaries are those boundaries where they coincide with that established particular cultural characteristics based upon ethnicity and economic pattern. We can see the example of like the border between China and Vietnam, India and Pakistan boundaries, and the Himalayan and Pyrenees regions, they are the example of the consequent boundaries. The next type of genetic boundaries is superimposed. Superimposed means if we are superimposing the boundaries on a particular region. So these are all either truce or ceasefire lines. After the war or after the ceasefire, different boundaries has been devised that are called superimposed boundaries, which are forcibly drawn and on that particular zone in that particular region. And these ignore the cultural aspect of that particular region. We can see the example in African regions. The boundaries has been devised by superimposed on different territories because those countries were the colonies of different regions. We can see the example in like North and South Korea and in the North and South Vietnam, where this boundaries has been superimposed. The next classification, next type is relic or the relic boundaries. They are not very much important in present time, but in the ancient or in the past time, these were important aspect for cultural social implications. So these are generally, the relic boundaries are generally formed when the smaller state is absorbed by a newer state, a larger state. Like we can see the example of the relic boundaries, which the boundaries between East and West Germany and the North and South Vietnam and the Great Wall of China, which is not so much important in terms of boundary. And the last classification is based on the locations. Boundaries are also classified based upon the locations. The first one is continental boundary and the next one is maritime boundaries. So the continental boundaries are all those boundaries which limit any state's sovereignty from different adjoining states on the land surface, and these are called the continental boundaries. It may be include a different kind of physical features. It may be mountainous region, it may be river, it may be lake. So, or on the other hand, those boundaries, the continental boundaries, they may be either geometrical or anthropological boundaries, but or they may be like relic boundaries, they may be superimposed boundaries, subsequent and consequent boundaries, or antecedent boundaries. So these all are those boundaries which are generally found on the continental or on the surface of the earth are called continental boundaries. The other one is the maritime boundaries. Maritime boundaries are those boundaries which are generally found in the water surface in different oceans. So it is a conceptual division of the earth water surface that divides the boundaries based upon the physiographic or the geopolitical criteria. Although in some countries this maritime boundaries is generally used as in terms of borders, and different countries they try to gain the access from this maritime boundaries, and the UNCLOS or the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea that came in 1983 has classified different zones, different criteria of the boundary location where different states having the sovereignty of a particular water. So these all maritime boundaries and continental boundaries we'll discussing in the separate topics. And the last we can see that the frontiers, they are the phenomena of the past. They were prevalent in the past, but in present time they has been changing in the new form, in form of the boundary, and they are changing because the boundaries, they are very much temporal and changing in nature. And we can see that prior to 20th century, different maps they shows that there were very much unclaimed land on the surface of the earth, but in present time the unclaimed land is not there, so different boundaries they are coming and that on that particular region. And most of the boundaries we can see had been devised in the last around 300 years. So we cannot say that which kind of boundary is better than the other. So in the last we can see that the best boundary may be the one that performs the lowest or the least functions. The motive of the boundary should be reasonatory or the existence of a particular state, and certainly the best boundary is that which is generally falling between two good neighbors. Thank you very much with this note.
On that note, I would like to thank sir for this very enriching discussion, and thank you dear friends for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.